You're listening to the Maritime Gardening Podcast, episode 128, brought to you by Vessi Seeds and Safer's Gardening Products. Well, folks, today we've got Niki Jabbour right here from Nova Scotia here to talk about greenhouses. Who is Niki Jabbour? She's the author of 4 books on food gardening, including the award-winning The Year-Round Vegetable Gardener, and her latest, Growing Undercover. She also hosted the Weekend Gardener radio show on 95.7 FM for the past 15 years. She's currently the garden expert on CBC Radio. For those of you that don't live in Canada, that's the Canadian Broadcast Corporation, kind of like the Canadian version of the BBC. She writes for magazines and newspapers across North America. Her website is savvygardening.com. All this information will be in the show notes as well on social media. And she has a YouTube channel, and it's called Niki Jabbour. So not hard to find. Niki, you've had a lot of big changes in 2022. What's going on with you? Tell us just what's going on with you.
Yeah, well, hey, Greg, thank you so much for having me back. It's great to chat. I'm such a fan of the show, and it's great to talk to you again. It's been a couple months now, so this is fantastic.
I know.
Well, 2022, I mean, gosh, it's been such a busy year. I actually, after 15 years, I decided to step away from my radio show.
I know.
It's been, I think, I kind of saved the news. I've known about it all season, honestly. But I did save the news until we almost wrapped the season 15. And I think a lot of people were shocked because it's so much fun. I've loved it. I've met thousands of guests, just like you do, talk to people from the UK, from all across Canada, from the US, Australia, so many places. But it's a weekend radio show, which meant that I was working every Saturday, part of every Saturday and part of every Sunday.
I know you're doing that thing live. Like, I mean, what I do, I can record it whenever, and it just, I just have to have something to upload on Saturday, on the first Saturday of every month, but I can be anywhere on that date. So it's a completely different commitment, what you were doing there.
Well, I mean,
and a different format on radio. I mean, like I was on your show once and I was like, holy smokes, this is stressful.
I mean, it's super fun. I mean, I was terrible year 1, right? But I mean, you get practice, and by year 15, it was so much fun, 2 hours every week. But for 8 months a year, it's certainly curtailed travel or things like that. So last weekend was the first weekend I didn't work, and I literally didn't work. I just enjoyed myself, and it was fantastic. But I mean, the guys at Rogers, everybody there, all the producers I've had, this has been fabulous. They were so supportive, and I appreciate that they were a little sad to see me go. And again, great opportunity for me, and it led to so many opportunities for me. But I also am still on the radio on CBC.
Yes, you took Marjorie's spot.
Yeah, they invited me to do that back in spring. I mean, gosh, I listened to Marjorie since I was probably like 12. And I remember I met her in person when I was probably like 16 and one of her new books had come out, and it was like meeting a rock star. It was amazing.
I met her at my work for a period of time. We had a sort of lunchtime gardening club. And
nice.
And one of my coworkers knew her. So she had Marjorie and to answer everybody's gardening questions. And this was just like maybe 3-4 years ago, right?
Okay, nice. Yeah, she's so knowledgeable.
So also so charming.
Yes.
And like usually the gardening show or the gardening club, I was sort of like the person doing the talking. Not when Marjorie was there. She just took over everything. I was just sitting, you do everything. It's fine.
I love it.
And not like not in a like it's not like she imposed herself.
No.
Just the situation imposed her. Like it was just everyone just needed to listen. It was just what I mean. Like it was So it was great.
I could listen to her all day long. Yeah, I mean, I was working at a bookstore when she did the book signing, and I was just like 16 and just kind of like working the cash register. But my boss is like, all right, just go back and sit with her, and you can take care of all the fans and keep things going smoothly during her book signing. So that's what I did. And then I kept asking her questions like, what is mulch? All these things that I had no idea back then.
Yeah.
So fun.
So there's that. But what about books and other things?
Oh my gosh, you sound like my publisher now. Get writing. I mean, my last book came out, about a year and a half ago, Growing Undercover, and it's done really well. And it's about part of the topic we're talking about tonight, greenhouses and using different types of garden covers to reduce pests and weather damage and extend the season and just grow healthier plants. So, which is what I do. So yes, I might write another book at some point relatively soon, but I haven't decided yet. But One of the projects I have been working on, working on it the past year, is a new calendar, which I know is probably going to come out backwards for you, but the Year-End Vegetable Gardener 2023 wall calendar, which is now in stores and online. And then we've just finished the 2024 one, so that'll come out next late summer. So that was really fun, something totally new for me, and it's a lot of photos from the book, as well as lots of tips and information, whether it's cold frame gardening, or growing tomatoes or vertical gardening. So just lots of fun
stuff. What does it have, like, every month? I haven't seen the inside of it. Does it have like
I don't
advice,
know if this will
like
show up with my background, but yeah, it's got advice. So you got your main photo, and then you've got all this advice here at the bottom,
relative to that month, like this is a good
exactly.
month to get your peppers started or whatever, that sort of thing.
Exactly. Or whatever crop is being featured, whether it's beets or cabbage or tomatoes or something like that, something to help you just grow healthier plants at a bigger harvest.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So it's fun.
I can't criticize the book thing. I've been telling, I started working on a book in 2017, and about at the end of 2017 I had the book about 1/3 or 1/2 written, and all I've done was rewrite it ever since then. So I can't criticize. I started a Substack page where I'm writing 1,000-word article a week.
Right.
So I don't know where I'll go with that. That's been interesting, although it's been a learning experience just trying to put out that kind of like 1,000 words a week, right? For me, that's
for sure. Yeah, I do that with savvygardening.com. Put anywhere from about 1,200 to 2,000 word article once a week for me, and then I have two partners as well that they do. They also write. So
I mean, that's a major. I thought, well, that's nothing, but it's a major thing to commit to. It's not so hard coming up with ideas. It's just seeing the idea through and making something readable is something else.
And trying to make sure it's comprehensive. It's including whatever question somebody's going to ask that you're going to address in that article. And also, if it's going to be published online, you want it to be in like often having bullet points or, something that they're going to be able to digest easy for sure.
Yeah. So
that's what I like anyway.
It's been a learning. I think by developing the discipline to do 1,000 words a week, I think if I can translate into getting the book done. And I was actually thinking about, ever heard of, like, in the old days, they used to have like serial novels?
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah.
So like in the science fiction magazines, you'd publish a chapter a month or something like that. So I might do something like that with the book on the Substack page, just to get it out there, right?
I mean, when I work with a publisher, like, so I've all 4 of my books have been with Story Publishing, who are just, I mean, they're amazing. They give me deadlines. I have 1 year or so to write the book, and at the end of that year, it better be done. So, the first 6 months, you're kind of like, I'm going to tap away a bit. And then the last 6 months, you're just like, it's just like flying like fire. You know what I mean? You really got to get that done.
That is terrifying.
Yes. A lot of publishers, though, are 6 months now.
Wow.
I couldn't even imagine that. That'd be a lot of pressure.
I know. So yeah, exactly. So I don't know how I would have pulled that off.
Was that a deadline? Honestly, I don't know if I could have done it. So I do work well with deadlines.
That's what most writers say, that they need a deadline.
We totally do. I'm a procrastinator.
So
oh look, I got to clean the toilets. Yeah.
Exactly. So we usually clean up the house if we have a house guest. We clean the house the morning that their guests are coming over.
Of course. What else are you supposed to do?
Exactly. So today we're going to talk about greenhouses, and you have one in your garden, which I assume this is a picture of your garden in the background. This is a picture of your greenhouse. So how long ago did you build the greenhouse, and why did you build it?
So this has been in my garden for about 5 years. And it's a walk-in polytunnel. It's 14 by 24 feet. It was a polytunnel kit. And I mean, I've had walk-in structures before. I think I got my first one when I was probably about 17, and it was literally like a metal like tent structure covered in like clear poly, and it was like $150 from a local store, and it was flimsy. But I still got to start seedlings in it. I got to start my plants, like putting them out 6-8 weeks earlier. So it did. It did teach me that the power of having that, level of protection in a garden. So when it was time to put a new structure in my existing garden, I wanted something that was big enough that it was going to provide us with lots of food all winter long. And I can tell you that when you're looking at greenhouses, if you can afford it in your budget, go as big as you can, because you will use up every square inch of that space. Right. I was overwhelmed when we covered it, and I walked in and I'm like, how am I going to fill this up? Well, it took a week. right?
Took a
So,
week.
and now I'm like, geez, I should have gotten 2 of these end to end. But so
Yeah.
I chose this structure because it was designed locally by a greenhouse expert that had been working in the field for over 40 years. And I had worked with him. I knew his work. I knew his knowledge base. And
Right.
he designed this structure. It's a professional grade greenhouse designed for a homeowner like me. And I knew it would, take hurricanes and nor'easters and
It
snow
looks like a
loads.
very
So
like sound,
yeah,
elegant design with the dome structure, right?
it
So
is. So it works. And then I paid a bit extra for the front to be polycarbonate instead of just soft poly because I wanted it to look nice in my backyard as well.
uh,
But totally worth it.
so when you say polycarbonate, you mean like a plexiglass kind of thing?
Yeah, so
I
it's a
see.
twin wall Lexan polycarbonate. So it's got, yeah,
Lexan.
two layers with
I
air
see.
pockets in between, which
Oh,
also increases the heat retention of the structure.
yeah. So you get the extra
Yeah.
insulation with that.
Yeah. I mean, like you probably, I would have loved a glass greenhouse, something beautiful and gothic and stylish. But when I compared the price per square foot for a glass greenhouse compared to my polytunnel, at the time when I bought it like 5 years ago, it was about, $2,500 for the polytunnel versus the glass greenhouse estimate I got was 160,000 for the same
Wow.
size. So I was like,
That's like a fancy cottage.
Yeah, I
So
would live there.
very fancy.
Yeah.
Actually, my first house
Mine
was
too.
my first house, which we bought in 2004, was cheaper than that.
Yeah. Mine too. And we bought ours in 2001 and I'm still living in it.
Oh,
So yeah.
yeah. Well, you got in at the right time, I'll tell you.
I know,
'Cause, last
Can't leave
couple
now.
of years, not so good. You're not going exactly. I got a couple questions here about greenhouses. I got some of my questions and then some viewer questions as well. I solicited them a few days ago just to see what they wanted to know. So, I mean, the first question I have is because I agonize over having one every year because I know I only have so many spaces on my property where there's good sun,
Yes.
and so I contemplate putting one in my garden, but then that space would be greenhouse and not greenhouse. It would be not garden.
Right.
So the first question is like, who should have a greenhouse? Is it right for everyone? Like, is it? Sometimes I think because my garden is so big, a 2,500 square foot garden, it kind of makes sense to have it would complement it to have a greenhouse. And every year I think about it, and then I just say, "Oh, screw it," and I don't do it.
Yeah.
But yeah, how did you decide to get one other than being a famous garden person and having a big garden and having a garden
Well,
show and stuff?
well, I mean, I wanted one because it was one of my goals. Like I've used them before, I've gardened in them before, and the goals that I had for my garden was to increase my year-round harvesting. Of course, I use cold frames, I use mini hoop tunnels, I use deep mulching, I use cloches, so I use lots of other little structures. But I wanted to really up my garden game and go bigger, and I wanted to increase, how much food we produce in a year. So the fact that was one of my garden goals. So I would think about if you're kind of weighing the options, well, evaluate what are your garden goals? Like, what do you want to get out of your garden? So a walk-in structure, whether it's a greenhouse or a polytunnel like mine or a geodesic dome, there's one actually just across the street from me, just in the other neighborhood. It is amazing. It's featured in my book, Growing Undercover. I mean, it allows you to get a serious head start on spring by depending on the structure, by months or even just a couple weeks if it's just a smaller tent-like structure like I started with. We live in a cold climate. The way that I've been able to grow peppers, eggplants, melons, tomatoes, it's 6 weeks earlier in spring and the 6 weeks earlier start to the harvest. I'm still harvesting tomatoes now from my unheated structure, and it's mid to late October and I've already had 4 hard frosts. So that doesn't usually happen here in Nova Scotia. I'm still harvesting peppers and eggplants in there and ground cherries and other types of warm season vegetables. Again, no heat in there. It's also a really comfortable working environment. I mean, I've been using cold frames for 25 years, but going up in February, to harvest greens from a cold frame, it can be a little wet and cold and damp and whatever.
Yeah.
You walk in your greenhouse. Like the first year, I think I did live in there. Like I worked up there. The Wi-Fi goes up there. I wrote a book in there. I mean, I'd have tea every day up there. I mean, I was in there all the time because it's always, even in cold winter, usually if it's sunny out, it's above freezing and it's mild. And then if you're thinking about how much food you want to produce, well, a cold frame is great. I love my frames, but they produce, a small amount of food in a 3 foot by 6 foot frame or a 3 foot by 4 foot frame, whereas a greenhouse, so much more space. So, and of course it can be flexible. Like in my greenhouse, I have 2 raised beds along the sides. I have a little patio in the back because I want to sit there. And then in the middle, it's like empty space. But normally, like right now, it's full of grow bags, which, you know, had vertical tomatoes and things like that are still going. Cucumbers are done. But I could take those grow bags out. I could put in another, you know, raised bed there, or I could change how I do it every year. So it gives me flexibility to adjust the design inside the structure. So
I see.
It's been fantastic.
Yeah,
you got to do it.
Yes. If I could find someone, just give me one for free, a sponsor. I'm sure maybe we could chat Vessi Seeds up, and maybe they'll do me a solid.
Yeah. Do they have structures? I have no idea.
I got a lot of stuff. I don't know, but I mean, boy, they got like rototillers and all kinds of stuff. So I wouldn't be surprised if they had something.
I mean, there's certainly there's a lot of different structures out there. So you know, and we can talk about this as we go along, but just make sure you pick one that meets your needs. You know what I mean? And the growing conditions where you live, you know, and the seasons you want to use it. So a flimsy structure is probably going to be more of a headache than a help.
I think I'd probably want something at least 6'6" at the peak, because I'm 6'4".
Okay,
So I'd be all hunched over.
You definitely would, yeah. Because mine is 9 feet, I think, in the middle, 10
Oh,
feet,
nice.
10 feet maybe.
Wow, you could do jumping jacks in there. It's perfect.
I have. I use I need a ladder, you know, for when, you know, as summer goes on, for harvesting the tomatoes at the top, or, you know, still training them vertically and pinching out suckers and stuff. I have a little step ladder I use.
This is perfect, because that's my very next question. So let's segue. So the question was, do you use it for anything? I always think of a greenhouse as like this thing that you grow stuff in like March and April, and then you move stuff into it in September so that it can continue to go. What do you use it for during the height of summer? I think July and August, when it's so hot. Do you have things
it is
going?
So hot.
What's going on in the greenhouse at the height of summer?
It is. I like to fill, like when I give talks, I have some photos I show of my greenhouse that are, and I can send you some, Greg, if you want to pop them into the show notes if people want to see them. So like, you know, in spring, you know, I've got the side beds planted with greens and quick growing root crops, like, you know, new baby carrots and baby beets and turnips. But then in summertime, I put those, again, the grow bags down the middle. And I have 16 feet of grow bags I use. They're filled with a mix, of course, of some good high quality potting mix, as well as lots of manure and some organic fertilizers. And then the tomatoes get tucked in there, usually late April, early May. And I get such a head start on the season. By the time the ones you know, that go in the garden are going out, the other ones in the greenhouse are like 2 feet tall. Wow. So, you know, I grow lots of heat lovers in there, and every square inch of the vertical space is used up by midsummer, because the tomatoes are like 9 feet tall at that point. The cucumbers and melons I grow down the middle are growing vertically, and they've reached the ceiling and are branching off, and I'm adding other little you know, twine and strings for them to climb up on. Cucamelons grow in there. I also overwinter artichokes. As you probably know, our season here is not hot enough for artichokes, which are zone 8, maybe 7B. But in my greenhouse, they overwinter. So I get artichokes starting in early May, late April, and they're like giant, like beautiful globe artichokes. Wow. So I do overwinter some tender things in there. But of course, you know, I'm growing, you know, vegetables in there all the time. But in summer, even though you think you wouldn't want it, it is just packed with vegetables. And, you know, we get an early start to that harvest of the warm season crops, the eggplants, the peppers, again, the melons, tomatoes, cucumbers. I do grow a few zucchini in there as well, just for fun. And then that keeps going. Like I said, there's still tomatoes there now in mid to late October. So it's pretty phenomenal what it does in the garden.
Well, I was going to ask you, I had a question, your plastic versus glass, but I think we already figured that out, given that it's about a 10-to-1 price differential. So I think glass is probably not, it's so expensive that you use glass if money is no object.
Yeah, 100%. And I mean, glass is definitely, it has better light transmission. Like a single layer of glass, you know, the problem with a single layer of glass is that it doesn't hold heat very well. So it's not very energy efficient. It's also breakable. You know, glass, even though it lets a lot of light in, it's very breakable. So if you have any trees nearby, if you got kids playing with baseballs, you know, glass, if it breaks, it's just no fun trying to replace
teenagers
that.
with the long hair and the rock and roll music. Yes.
Terrible, isn't it? Golly. Yeah. So, I mean, if you had double paneled glass, that's more energy efficient, but it's I think that'd be the most expensive greenhouse. So, you know, you have poly, like my poly on my polytunnel is greenhouse poly. It's rated for 4 years. It's UV treated, so it doesn't break down in the light. And it's already 5 years old. I'm hoping to get 1 more year out of it before I replace it. But you can also use like you mentioned earlier, polycarbonate, the hard plastics. You can get single layer, you can get twin wall, like I have on the end of my polytunnel. You can get triple layer, you can even get 5-layer. So the higher, though, the more layers you have, the less light can pass through it. So you are losing some of that light, of course, which is okay if you're in a hot climate and you're trying to maybe grow things not so hot. But here, twin wall is what I would want to go with.
I see. Well, and I think, like, even with my plastic domes that I just put over my garden beds, so I can sort of turn each bed into something like a cold frame.
Yeah.
I find, I mean, that's just 6 mil poly that you get at a hardware store for using in the walls of a house, right? And I find they last about 5 years. Then you have to start putting little bits of like tape on them to tack up, almost like a guy who's shaved, with all the little bits of toilet paper.
Yep.
So they start to look unsightly, but you can squeeze an extra year or two out of them.
Easily.
So if you can get 5 years out of that,
as long as it's UV stabilized,
when it's not. I mean, it's meant to be inside a wall, so it doesn't have any of those properties, right? So, and you've got like that, it's not steep, it's sort of flat, so the ice cakes on, it gets a real beating. But I squeeze about 5 years, so I wouldn't be surprised if you get double what it's guaranteed at. We'll have to see.
I'm being careful with it. So I hope so. But yes, you can buy cheaper polyplastics, even things like drop cloth. And I've used all of those different ones. They just don't last as long. So the greenhouse plastic has been worth the investment for me. But the best way to get it is if you go to a supplier, like Halifax Seed, and they have a damaged roll. Often you can get them for a better price. Or you buy it with a group of people, like a garden club or some fellow gardeners, because they're usually at least 32 feet by 100 feet or 40 feet by 100 feet. So, I mean, you can share a lot of that plastic with people.
Right. Well, my next question actually is something you alluded to earlier. About things like tomatoes and peppers and eggplants and stuff like that. Do you sow them in your greenhouse, or do you sow them indoors and then you move them to the greenhouse and then you move them outside? Or what do you sow in the what do you actually sow in the greenhouse, and what do you use the greenhouse to harden off, or do you use it to harden things off? How do you use
it? Because as you're saying, like a lot of people would use a greenhouse in spring. The way I used it when I first had one as a teenager, to harden off seedlings. That's what I used it for. I started some seedlings and I hardened things off. Now I don't use it. It's, for me, the hardening off is a small part of it. So my tomatoes and stuff are started indoors under my grow lights. And then, I do move them to the greenhouse, the polytunnel, early, of course, than I normally would put them outside, maybe like a month earlier. And then they're left to grow on there. I do have a table at the very back. They can go there, or I just line, there's like trays all up and down the pathways, and like mid-spring, there'll be like 8 trays of tomatoes and, like all these peppers and everything. And they're just in there. So because they don't get frost and the temperatures are relatively mild. If it really gets cool one night in like, early May, late April, I'll toss a row cover over top the seedlings, but they do fine. Right. I don't put things out that are super, super tender, like basil at that point yet. I wait usually till more like mid-May in there. But of course, like there's a lot of other things hardening off, the lettuces, cabbages, broccolis. So I don't really, I could use it to start the seedlings, but grow lights are so efficient that I just prefer to do that. But you certainly could. So in spring, too, like I say, I have the trays in my pathways because the beds are full of vegetables. As soon as the day length starts getting longer again in early March, late February, I have cleaned out those beds of anything that was finished up in winter. And I'm sowing, again, all those early spring root crops and salad greens and just getting a jump on the harvest.
Wow. Okay. So you do sow a lot in there.
Oh, yes. Yeah. I direct sow a lot in the beds. That's primarily how I do it. Lots of mixed salad greens too, mesclun mixes, spinaches, Asian greens, baby kales, scallions, so many things.
And then you move all that stuff out.
No, those are left there and we eat them. So I will be harvesting spinach starting usually like the new crop. I'll start sowing spinach in there mid-February. We're harvesting that by late March, into April. Then it's kind of pulled out, and then I'll start putting things like peppers or tomatoes in there. It'll replace that.
Oh, wow. I see. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. So I think you answered this question earlier. You don't have a source of heat in your greenhouse. It's just the heat is just whatever solar energy it stores in the ground, sort of thing.
Yep. There's things that I could do. I could line, the pathways with stones. I could put some barrels of water in there. I visited domes and polytunnels and greenhouses that actually have a water reservoir inside them where the water is absorbed. The heat, water absorbs the heat during the day, releases it slowly at night, so there's not so much of a temperature drop. I haven't made space for that. I know people who keep a rabbit hutch in their greenhouse to give off some heat, or have a compost pile in there again to generate heat. So there's lots of things you could do. But you know, I haven't found that I really needed it. So for my artichokes that overwinter in there, I do deep mulch them in late autumn. But that's it. Yeah, there's so I don't use any heat. You know, you can buy small greenhouse heaters. And I have to say, I've been a little tempted because I wouldn't mind overwintering some fig trees in there.
Right.
But you know, one of my things is using no extra energy. So no heat.
I've seen guys, they take these old, you know, like when your house has had a oil heater for, you know, like the old houses with the oil tank, and you have to replace those every 10 years.
Yeah.
So they'll take, so the old ones are just garbage. So they take an old oil tank to fill the whole thing up with water, and they paint it black, and they put it at the back of the greenhouse.
Yep.
To just
the
sort
north
of
side.
Yeah, to just sort of suck up sun heat all day. That seems, you know, yeah, seems like
I know people that stack
move.
barrels as well. Like you say, they paint them black, they stack up a whole wall of barrels. Or I've been in a greenhouse too, like a commercial sized greenhouse, but the whole north wall is just large stones, like in sort of like, you know, like the large kind of wire cages. And that absorbs heat all day long and releases at night. But I mean, in a home greenhouse, that's not really practical. But,
oh, that's just the thing. I mean, sometimes we dream big, home gardeners, but there's only so much you can do. And exactly. Where, I mean, I think it's relatively obvious, but we should ask the question: where should one be positioned in a garden? Let's say you only have you have one space in your property for gardening type stuff, because not everyone. I have a large property. You know, I have a lot of space, but most people don't. So where should you put the greenhouse?
It should go where it's going to get full sun all year long. I mean, which can be challenging, like you say, in a small yard or an urban area. It can be hard to find that perfect spot. If it's getting a lot of shade, then you're going to have problems with things like mold and fungus and things like that. So you really want to make sure it's a nice sunny spot, preferably away from buildings, no tall trees over top, preferably close to a water source, and maybe an electrical source as well if you need to add a fan. Or if you want to, you know, add an irrigation system, obviously you want it close to where you can attach some hoses or soaker hoses or drip irrigation. I mean, I do hand water my greenhouse, so obviously I need to have it close to a hose, because lugging watering cans would not be fun.
How
so
do you
those
get the
are
water
all
in there in the winter when you can't run a watering hose in like March? How do you?
I don't have to water. I mean, I very rarely water. Usually I start to water in March, but like in pretty much late December, January, February, I'm not watering because things aren't actively growing, so the plants aren't really transpiring. Everything just slows down with the low light levels, and that's really the, you know, more important than the temperature. It's the fact that there's such little light, so the plants aren't growing very much. So once things start going up again in late February with the increased day length, above 12 hours again, 10 hours again, then that's when they'll start to grow, and I'll need to start watering. But generally I don't have to water at all. Sometimes you get like a like that February thaw when you get like a 20°C day. And I might run a hose, but I think I've only done that once in 5 years. So,
the first question is from Francis Miauganu, and his question is he wants tips for high wind sites, also passive airflow and heat retention tips.
Gosh, high wind sites. When we had that hurricane here 3 weeks ago, I was looking out the window the whole time thinking, is the greenhouse going to blow away? And it's been through 4 hurricanes, many nor'easters with winds in different directions. So I'm on top of a hill. And so my greenhouse has been put through a lot. So the reason I bought that structure is because I knew it could take it. So that's one thing. Invest in a structure that's going to put up with the growing conditions you have. So, I mean, high winds, are certainly a part of life where I live. So I went with a structure that's super sturdy, and well rated for that. So I would say try to do that, particularly if you're going to grow year round. I mean, if you're just looking for spring starting seedlings, maybe some summer tomato protection, that sort of thing, maybe some early fall crops, you could have a temporary structure, that it just has like the supports, the metal supports or wooden supports, you cover with the plastic, and then that's taken off and stored for winter when there's like storms and things like that. So you could do that if you don't want year-round harvesting. So look at your local greenhouses. What are other people growing in near you, whether they're homeowners or farmers? Talk to greenhouse supply stores, garden centers, and just to make sure that you end up with a structure that's going to be really strong. So I would say, and for mine as well, not only is it steel hoops, like again, professional greenhouse rated, we mounted it on hemlock base and then used 3-foot long rebar stakes to mount it to the ground. So it's not going anywhere. Like the
Not going
plastic
away.
might fly off sometime, but the
Yeah.
structure is not going anywhere.
Right.
And I said, if we move in a couple of years, I'm taking that with me. And my husband's like, no, that's staying. I'll get a new one because that is so in the ground.
Yes.
Yeah, but in terms of like heat retention, if you're trying to hold heat in, for example, like it's October right now. So yeah, the days are pretty mild, but then it gets pretty chilly at nighttime. So for example, I have roll up sides. It's one of the reasons I went with a polytunnel. It makes venting so easy. So I might have one side or the door open right now, because it's warm and sunny out, and then it's going to get cold. I close it up in late afternoon. Don't wait until nighttime when the temperatures have dropped. Close it up early to retain that heat. You could also have a poly, like most professional greenhouses, if they had a polytunnel, they would have 2 layers of poly and an inflation kit fan to keep like a layer of air between those 2 layers. So you could do that as well. That certainly retains a lot more heat, but then you need an electrical source, and it's going to cost more money. So
I see.
But that's an option too. And you and I already talked about sort of different ways to, preserve heat and retain heat, whether it's rocks or bricks for pathways, water reservoirs, things like that. I think you said passive ventilation.
Well,
Well, that's
just
my roll-ups.
not
Yeah.
ventilation, but I think airflow. So how do you sustain some, because you need some degree of airflow in the
Yes.
greenhouse to prevent mold and mildew and all that nasty sort of stuff and plant health. So how do you ensure a degree of airflow in there other than just
It
opening
depends
the
on the
door?
structure. Yeah.
Stuff, right?
Yes, but it depends on the structure. If you have like a glass or polycarbonate greenhouse, then they will usually come with vents, like roof vents that help allow air to vent out. They might even come with a fan. So you might need a fan depending what type of structure you have. And they come on maybe a couple times an hour, depending on the temperature and the humidity to get the air flowing. But for me with the polytunnel, I just roll the sides up. I mean, air flows very well through that. I do have 2 windows in the back. I also have the front door I can open to. But I find the roll-up sides just make it very easy to vent, and make sure the air flows really well.
What do you do in February?
Oh, then it's closed. But in February, I'm not worried about airflow so much because I'm more worried about trying to keep all of the heat that's in there during the day. So yeah, I'm not worried about airflow in February. There's not really plant diseases happening in February. The temperatures
Too
are
cold for real problems. Yeah, I
There's
guess.
no slugs either, Greg.
Yes. Well, and I also think like I found this in our house as well, because one of our rooms has a cathedral ceiling.
Yeah.
I think when you have that dome, and especially when there's a certain volume of air, I think there's almost a natural air turbulence, because you have got the sun shining on this side. So one side might be a bit warmer than the other side, and it just creates,
Yeah, for sure.
I think there's a natural air turbulence in a dome.
Yeah.
I love the dome shape, and I think there's also something to be said with regard to high winds. You see, I've seen some of these actually right down in like Prospect and Terrence Bay, right by the water. People have these glass A-frame greenhouse, and I'm like, man, you are asking for it with it, because I mean, it's just 90-degree wall, whereas what you've got, it can take. It's made for wind.
Yeah,
really
and
is.
it goes up, but then like this, so it sheds wind very easily. I mean, a type of structure that sheds wind the best would be a dome, a geodesic dome.
Yeah.
And you can DIY your own, but you really need to be very good at math, or you can buy a kit. So I would suggest buying a kit. The neighbors that have one that I know, they have a kit. They bought a kit. I think it was 26 feet in diameter. So it's like 13 feet in the middle, because it's the height is half the diameter. And then they have it on a 2-foot high knee wall, I think it is. So it's like 15 feet in the middle. And my gosh, like tomatoes in there in like May are like 10 feet tall. It's crazy. It never freezes in there, and it's triple twin wall or triple polycarbonate. So it's very insulating.
Well, you've almost, I mean, last year I had you on, or last spring I had you on to talk about transplants. And I don't usually do transplants, but I actually did some. And
how'd it go?
First year I ever got peppers in my garden. Like I've had a hell of a time getting them to grow, because it's just so foggy and miserable here. So I used a variety of pepper that Lee Reich recommended. He said grows fast, sweet Italian. I started them in 1st of March and carefully put them out, hardened them off according to your instructions. And we're still eating them. Like we have a ridiculous amount of peppers, right? And eggplant didn't go as well, but I didn't give it the prime real estate. Like I have like best spot in the garden.
Yeah.
Peppers were
That's
near
the greenhouse. That's why you need a greenhouse.
Greenhouse, yes. So maybe, well, and I'm thinking in my head of ways I could just make one using
course, you can use mini hoop tunnels for sure.
Yeah, just being clever with something bigger than what I just go bigger, a bigger version of a hoop tunnel.
Yeah, I
But
mean, you can get a metal bender as well. Like I have one to bend 10-foot long metal, like a tubing sort of
conduit,
thing.
conduit,
That's
yeah,
the word. It's a
yeah.
hard word to remember today.
Yes.
So you can bend that over top, and mine just makes perfect 4-foot wide, short pieces. But you can get them 6 feet wide as well, and get longer pieces of conduit, or even just bend it so then you use a center connector, and you can easily make a walk-in polytunnel
Oh, I
that
can
way.
tell you, I'm percolating right now. Um,
Or PVC pipes with connectors. I mean,
PVC,
I see people do that. It's
oh,
not quite as strong necessarily, but 3 season greenhouse.
these are the sort of things. If I'm trying to get asleep in bed, I'll start engineering
That
in my head, right?
would keep me awake.
Yes, no, that's like I get because you think of it's something you'll think about like all season long, and you
Oh yeah.
in your mind's eye, oh, how do I solve this problem? What do I do about that? And I can spend a long time thinking through something like that.
For sure.
All right, the next question is from Viola McShannon, and the question is, what's the best small greenhouse for a
Mm.
backyard? Maybe I think she means dimensions. She says maybe 6 by 6.
Oh, probably.
This person's in Zone 5, Nebraska. But yeah, I
Okay.
think she's asking about dimensions.
I mean, 6 by 6 is not very big.
Yeah.
In that case, I would probably just go with a cold frame or mini hoop tunnel, like we talked about, over top of raised bed, because it's just going to be so much more inexpensive. Like, you know what I mean? To build a 6 foot by 6 foot greenhouse, it's going to cost a lot, and it's really not going to be that much more to build one that's 6 by 8 feet or even 6 by 10 feet, and you're going to have so much more growing space. With a 6 by 6 foot, you might have like a 2 foot by 6 foot little bed inside, and another 2 foot by 6 foot bed, and then a 2 foot by 6 foot pathway, but you're not really getting a lot of growing space in there. Now, if that's all of the space you have, then you certainly could do it. But if you can go larger, it's not going to cost a lot more to go 6 by 8. So that's probably what I
Yeah.
would try to do, or even 6 by 10. It all depends on the space and the budget, really.
Yeah.
But bigger is better. You'll never regret having a slightly bigger structure if you can. And again, it usually doesn't cost that much more per square foot. Once you've already sort of invested in a 6 by 6 foot structure, it's
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
not a big stretch. Yeah.
Yeah. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Next question is from there's some lovely filth down here. That's not the question. That's the handle. Um,
All right.
how how to deal with humidity and poor air circulation later in the season when you want to ripen as many
Um,
tomatoes as you can before they're finally taken out.
well, I mean, sunny days evaporate moisture from leaf surfaces, and soil. And the warm air, kind of holds the moisture, which causes condensation. So this was what promotes plant diseases, what they're talking about, I think, for tomatoes. So you really want to reduce the humidity. And the first step in that is watering properly.
Yeah.
You don't want to be splashing water about onto pathways and, even soil and plants, the tops of plants, the foliage, if you can. I water in my greenhouse with a long handled watering wand, like a 36-inch watering wand, and I direct the water right at the base of the plants.
Mm,
And then I also use straw mulches to kind of hold that soil moisture. And that definitely helps reduce, the condensation, the risk of diseases, things like that. And if you are going to water where you're splashing, you make sure you do it early in the day so that the leaves can dry off relatively quickly. Proper plant spacing, of course, can also help the leaves dry quicker. If things are
right.
overcrowded, they'll stay wetter longer, and that water evaporates and causes condensation and higher humidity. Weed-free pathways as well. So I think it's important to keep that
Mm,
the pathways weed-free and well draining, so that if you do splash water on the pathways, it doesn't just sit there and
uh,
evaporate. And then consider
yes.
your ventilation, right? As I mentioned, I have roll-up sides, which makes it super easy. But if you're in a smaller, like a glass greenhouse or a polycarbonate greenhouse, where you just have, a couple ceiling vents or the door or window to open, you might have to add a fan to really get that air moving.
Right.
Chances are, if you've bought a kit, it's going to tell you and offer advice on what type of fan or what they have in terms of ventilation. So make sure you read those instructions
Right.
to see what they recommend, because the manufacturer is obviously going to know their product, and
Yeah.
they'll know what you need.
I see. Um, all right. The
Yeah.
next question is, I think, a key question, and we've flirted with this question a little bit. So it's from Green Love. I would like to learn some techniques on how to regulate the temperature swings in a greenhouse. Um, and the person says, if helpful, I live in Northern California, Zone 9B. And I mean,
Wow.
this is the thing I want to ask too, because from 7 in the morning till 5 p.m., I'm not here,
Mm.
right? So
Mhm.
even in my little hoop houses, my little domes, There's some days where I'll go to work. Actually happened this year. I went to work, and normally I'll prop them up and put a little rock underneath just to make a little space
Yep.
to the hot air. I forgot to do it one day, and I lost almost an entire bed of beets. They were just vaporized basically in one
Hmm.
day. And it was May, and usually May is kind of cold here, but it was like a super day, and it must have been super hot. It must have been 50 C in there, something like
Oh
that. So
my
everything
God.
was
Yeah,
killed.
yeah. Got
But
cooked.
yeah, so in a greenhouse, when you got so much, something the size of yours, where you got so much going on in there, so much riding on it, right? I mean, I just
Yeah.
lost some beets, right? But you would have, if it was a greenhouse, I would have lost my peppers and my tomatoes and my eggplant and all my early greens and all that other stuff, right? So yeah, for the person who's, got to leave, uh, what's the best way to deal with all of that?
Yeah, I mean, as you know, you can automate anything nowadays using
Yes.
your phone. I mean, that's a lot of money. I don't have an automated system. It'd be tempting. I do have an indoor-outdoor greenhouse thermometer that's inside my kitchen, and that's I look at it 20 times a day, I have to say sometimes. It's just so interesting. Like if
Yes.
I know it's 8 degrees Celsius, but it's sunny, well, gosh, it's 24 in the greenhouse. I don't
I
know.
couldn't
Bit of a
stop looking at
nerd,
that too. Yeah, yeah, no,
right?
that
Oh my
sounds
God.
cool. Yeah.
I'm obsessed.
Yes.
But yeah, you could automate it. But also, there was a time a couple of years ago, and I shared this on my Instagram because I think people should know, that everybody screws up sometimes. And I did accidentally on a May day, and it was like one of those May days when it was 30. I forgot to roll up the sides of my polytunnel because I had an early work call and then I was nonstop. And when I realized it around lunchtime, all of my tomatoes, pepper seedlings were in there hardening off,
Right.
and half of them were cooked.
Right.
So it was like, oh my God, so stupid. I grow extra, thank goodness. You know what I mean? So, and I
Yeah.
shared that, and people were so sympathetic because that happens. So, yeah, say if I was leaving at 7 a.m., and I check the forecast, I roll up the sides. Even if it's cool in the morning, that's probably going to be just fine. I always err on the side of venting, whether it's a
Uh,
cold frame, my polytunnel, a greenhouse, because plants that are grown slightly cooler are going to be hardier than those that are
yeah.
grown slightly too warm. Because, plants grown too warm, they get a lot of fresh green growth that's easily damaged and cold. So I would roll up the sides. I would open the door. I would open the windows.
So like the
The roof
shock and
vents.
the variation would actually help the
Yeah.
plant sort of get ready for what's coming.
Yeah. So I mean, I would do that. And then, when it got hotter later in the day, not a big deal because you've already opened your greenhouse or your polytunnel and there's air flowing through there. So you wouldn't have to worry too much.
I've always thought
Yeah.
I can I can conceive in my mind of a device that has a thermostat that is solar, that's battery operated, that when the internal temperature of the greenhouse hits a certain temperature, it just opens a vent near the peaks, right?
Well, they have those
Like a two
actually.
vents that just open, because I don't want to have to check my phone on some stupid app.
No,
I just want like, oh, okay, it's hot now. Let's open up a little bit. Oh, it's getting cold now. Let's close back down. Like that
yeah.
would be. There was a thing like that.
It uses beeswax, I believe, and it just when it
Beeswax.
gets to certain temperature, they open up, and you can use them for cold frames or like greenhouses to open the windows in greenhouses. So, I think even Halifax Seed sells them, or greenhouse supply stores. You can buy
What
them
are these
online,
things
probably.
called?
Automatic louver openers, I think it is, or cold frame opener. You'll have to look it up. But they've had those for many years, a couple decades, because I know someone who used one when I was just starting using cold frames like 25 years ago.
Huh.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I mean, there's other things you can do too. You could be using in a warm climate, you could be using shade cloth too, right? And of course, their growing season will be different than ours. People in very warm climates, like 9B or 8B, I think you said was the zone, they're growing tomatoes not the same time we are in July and August, because those are very hot months there. They'd be growing tomatoes in like March, April, and then maybe again in like September, October, or even into November. So their
Yeah.
growing season would be slightly different than ours. But using shade cloth in a greenhouse, some people would use a greenhouse whitewash to paint, like a glass greenhouse to decrease the amount of sun that's coming in there. Or if you had something like triple wall polycarbonate, that's blocking some of the sun that's coming in as well. So there's
Right.
lots of other things you can do as well to reduce the heat and temperature in there to eliminate hot spots.
Right. 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 That makes sense.
Yeah.
Um, okay. So the next question, those are some good ideas. And I like the advice, just always err on the side of venting. That's,
Yes.
I don't know why I haven't arrived at that. Because yeah, there's times I think, oh, well, because there's so many days where
Yeah.
I want it to be as hot as it can be. You
You
know what
want
I
to
mean?
push
Like,
it.
yeah, like
Yeah.
I think, well, if I open it up, it's not going to be, but But then you lose everything because you don't do
Yeah.
that, right?
And the
So,
light's more important than the higher temperature, because again, high temperatures are going to push out soft growth, which invites things like aphids as well. So
yeah.
yeah,
That's
I
true.
try keep her cool.
Yeah, good advice. All right. This one's from Sabrina. And this is not what you've done, but I'm sure you have some ideas. What's the best way to inexpensively build a functional greenhouse?
Yeah. Well, I mean, mine was pretty inexpensive, compared to some of the other options, like a polycarbonate greenhouse. And what I paid for my 14 by 24-foot polytunnel was pretty much the same thing. Some of the garden centers were offering for like an 8 by 10 little polycarbonate like structure that was not very windproof, or you know what I mean? They're a little flimsy.
I think this is
Um,
like a DIY.
yeah, so you
Uh,
can DIY, like you and I mentioned, bending pipes. You can DIY using pallets.
right,
There's a gentleman down in Hubbard's that has a couple pallet greenhouses he built himself and covered with polycarbonate, old windows, greenhouse poly.
right,
Um, I wouldn't buy a cheap product. Like you can go online to some of these websites and buy really inexpensive, flimsy greenhouses, and
right.
maybe they'll last a season or two, but they'll last for like spring, summer, early fall. They're not going to go into winter for you. And again, you might just get that 1 or 2 years out of it. I don't know in the end if you're going to be paying more for that. But
Right.
as well, like I want to use less waste in my garden, less
Yeah.
plastic. And if I do buy a plastic product, I want it to be incredibly durable so that I
Yeah.
can use it for many years. Because again, we should all be using less plastic. So that's part of my garden mantra, is just try to be mindful that way. But you can DIY them from wood, from PVC, from metal conduit that's bent, and
Right.
covering it with polys or old windows. I know there's a nice one down in St. Margaret's Bay here, about 10 minutes away. They built the greenhouse out of old windows, but then they bought polycarbonate for the top because they wanted a nice, like really shedding structure for rain and snow. And it's a
Yeah.
really nice structure. And they've been growing in it for the past 2 years, and
Oh,
it's
so they got
wonderful.
windows on the vertical, and then they got like
Yep.
some sort of dome or something like.
Polycarbonate,
Yeah.
just roof,
Oh,
for
it's just a
glazing.
roof.
Yeah.
I see.
Yeah.
Okay.
Works
Yeah.
great. Yeah. And
Yeah.
they're
Yeah.
growing inside of it in buckets. They're not growing in like raised beds or in the ground. They've just got all these, the big white buckets. They're
Oh,
growing in those. I think
I
they're
see.
10-gallon buckets, 15-gallon buckets. So yeah.
Okay. And and agricultural poly as opposed to just getting hardware store poly because it's gonna last longer conceivably.
It's worth the money, in
Yeah.
my experience. And I've bought a lot of polys and I've tried a lot of different products over the
That's
years.
the
I mean,
guilt that goes with bagging up, like, like you do all these cool
I
projects and it lasts
know.
a few years, and then you're throwing all this plastic away and you feel like crap.
Yeah.
Um,
So
yeah.
let it, and you can buy greenhouse polys that are even more fussy, like ones, with anti-condensation. I mean, there's a lot of different types out there, but really, as long as you have the UV, treated poly, then it should be fine.
UV treated poly. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. That's some good ideas. Uh,
Yeah.
Next question's from Farmer Red. Uh,
Okay.
Cold climate styles and best materials to use. How to maintain soil health if using raised beds. Actually, that's the question I was going
Yeah.
to ask. So, I mean, you've got all this
Mm,
stuff growing in your garden in there. It's not like an outdoor garden.
yeah.
I don't know if you're mulching it or if you've got that sort of composting, or are you just constantly sort of bringing in inputs to maintain the. I guess there's two questions. So, cold climate styles and best materials to use. Let's start with the soil health
Yeah.
one because that's the one I'm most interested in. How do you
I know.
maintain soil health in your greenhouse?
Well, Greg, I feed it. I feed the soil all the time.
Right.
So, every time I clean something out of there, because I don't just garden in spring or in summer or in fall. It's 12 months a year I've got things growing. So every time something comes out, I feed the soil, whether it's my compost, whether it's leaf mold, whether it's aged animal manures, maybe it's some organic amendments. And then I do also lime a little bit too to make sure the soil pH is where I want it to be.
Hmm.
I'll do a soil test maybe once a year,
Oh, really?
just to kind of check that level. But yeah, and then I don't use chemical fertilizers because the salts can build up in them. When I water, I try to deep water because my beds are pretty deep. Like they're not high; they're about 8 inches high, but the soil does obviously go down. So I want to make sure the water goes all the way down because rain doesn't get in there. So
Yeah,
I do
yeah.
try to make sure I deep water to maintain all the microorganisms that are living in there, that they have the moisture that they need.
Right.
But yeah, other than that, I treat it like a regular garden. I feed the soil regularly; it gets watered. Yeah, it does well for me. It's been 5 years and things are thriving.
Do you ever get, this is a question I had on the top of my head. Do you ever get uh, mice, moles,
Mm.
things like that in there?
I've had a mouse once. 3 years ago, I think it was. Yeah, and I had a row cover over top. It was winter, and I had a row cover over top some things in there, some salad greens, and I noticed there was a hole in it, and then they'd taken it and made a little nest with the row cover. They had torn it up a little bit in one part.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I did have some mouse traps I obviously don't want mice in my food garden. So that's how I've taken care of the issue before.
Yeah.
Obviously it's impossible to make it completely sealed and proof. Like I did find the hole they got in,
You can't
like
keep
outside.
mice out of anything.
No, so yeah, I just keep an eye out, sort of thing. And but yeah, so it hasn't been a big problem for me. I mean, I could have lined my beds with hardware cloth as well to keep them from tunneling under.
Right.
In retrospect, maybe I would do that next time, but they haven't been a huge problem for me. And I do try to keep an eye out for them just in case. But it's been I have no complaints, and I don't have a cat either, so
I
that would
think
help
when
probably.
I think it's not like all the mice in the neighborhood know you've got this great place. I think
Yeah.
the one you had sort of wandered in, it was like, oh my God, this is
Yeah.
amazing. I'm staying
Yeah.
here. But
Yes.
yeah, the rest of them just don't know it's there, so they have to wander in by accident to know.
Yeah. I do sometimes get chipmunks in there though. This summer and last summer, they would come in because they love the sun gold tomatoes and they love the
Right.
ground cherries. So they'd come in and I'd walk in
Yes.
and they was looking at me eating like a cherry tomato. But you know what? They eat so little really that I don't mind it, but I don't want them in there, but it's hard to keep them out.
Can you leave the door open? Do you ever get a bird in there?
I've had a bird in there, but I mean, usually the sides are open at the same time, so it can get out very easily.
Okay.
I get a lot of dragonflies and bees in there as well. But of course, when these creatures are out, the sides are open, the windows are open, the door is open, and they get out pretty easly. So, although there's a couple spiders in there, so sometimes they do get stuck in the spider webs.
Yes,
but
yes.
the spiders are beneficial. So what are you gonna do? Nature.
Well, the other part of the question was cold climate style. I think we addressed that one, and best materials. I think we addressed those questions. Best
Yeah,
materials.
I mean, I would just say something with a steep roof peak if you're worried about snow loading.
Yes.
You can get different styles. Like you can get a Quonset style tunnel or greenhouse, which is like the roundish ones. Those don't shed snow as well as like one with a Gothic peak. So I would just look for something like that.
Yours is yours looks very, I see it has a peak, but it's very domey.
Yeah. Yeah. But
sometimes
snow slides off it.
What about when we get that weird fog, snow, ice, rain stuff that glues onto your car window?
Oh yeah.
You know what I mean? That must stick to that.
It doesn't actually.
What? Really?
I mean, it slides off pretty. It's kind of fun. I go up there sometimes, right after a snowstorm, and it's covered in snow. And usually, because it heats up quickly, right? Even on
it's got the internal heat. It's like a car with a heater on. So it
melts and then it slides off. It's like a snow avalanche. But you do get snow piling up the sides when we have a heavy snow winter. But that's just insulation, so that's not a bad thing.
It's got internal heat. Yeah, you've got bioactivity going. It's always warmer inside there than outside. So there's always a differential. So it'll slide off. It will snow.
And early on, when I first had it, I had a soft bristle broom, and I would kind of go up because I was worried about it. But then I was like, "Why am I doing this? It's sliding off within like a few minutes."
Off.
So
I see. So as soon as the sun comes up and things warm up, things happen. That makes a lot of sense.
Really quick. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, because with my smaller domes, they just don't have.
Oh yeah, no.
It's a microclimate, but it's not a large microclimate. I think the larger the microclimate, the more synergy you get. We were talking earlier today.
World class, Greg.
World class synergies. That's an inside joke, but but yeah, I think there's probably a what would you call that? Like a mathematical relationship where
for sure.
For the larger it gets, you get an exponential
higher volume of warm air and such.
Yeah.
But honestly, even with mini hoop tunnels or cold frames, if I get a bit of snow on them outside, I don't really mind because again, that's insulation. It's not like in January and February, those crops are growing inside so much. So if I'm not going to harvest for a couple of days, that snow is just going to keep them warmer. So it's not a big deal.
Yeah, the snows. I mean, you got the igloo effect, right? So it's
exactly.
There's no downbeat or no downside.
As long as it's not like 2 feet of snow, which is going to crush the structure, then you're fine.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. The next question, our last question, is from Jean Snow. Apropos of our last topic.
I believe Jean actually used to live in Nova Scotia. We had a Jean Snow here. That was an urban farmer. So talented.
I wonder if this is the same one. Because I think these last couple of questions are from YouTube. are
Okay.
from from
I
Facebook. So this would be the
oh, okay.
Facebook. There's more
Hi,
locals.
Jean.
It might be the Gene Snow.
All
Um,
right, awesome.
the other question is, what is the best way to keep vegetables warm throughout winter? My greenhouse is
Yeah.
solid structure, and I have raised beds. Um, what's the best way to keep the hardy veggies from freezing?
Yeah,
No,
I
no,
mean
no.
raised beds.
She says her greenhouse is solid, and she has raised beds just to keep
Okay.
hardy veggies from freezing. Right.
I mean, depending how high the raised beds are, I know people that have like really like 2 foot high raised beds in their greenhouse, and obviously they're more exposed to the cold air, so they're going to freeze quicker. So my raised beds are only about 8 inches tall, and they don't freeze at all in my polytunnel with no heat. So if they're really tall raised beds, that could be part of the issue.
Right.
And my beds are also made from 2 inch thick hemlock, which is also very insulating. And of course in winter where I have root crops and salad greens in them, I do put mini hoop tunnels with just like wire hoops, 9 gauge wire hoops and covered with row cover for like a sort of like a tunnel inside a tunnel. So that
Yes.
helps keep them nice and protected. And the soil, again, it doesn't freeze.
I've
But if the
seen that
soil,
tunnel inside the tunnel thing before. It's a
yeah.
great idea. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense.
And I mean, you can buy 9 gauge wire at your hardware store. I clip it into the size I want, row cover, pretty easy. If the beds are really tall and you're trying to prevent them from freezing, I mean, you could put straw bales up against them, bags of leaves. If you have styrofoam sheeting from another project or packaging or bubble wrap, you could put some of that around it too. That actually works pretty well, especially bubble
Right.
wrap. So that would help. And then maybe if you're having trouble with the really cold temperatures in the soil, then you could stick to the most cold hardy vegetables like, scallions and leeks and kales and, Asian greens like zucchini savoy and mosh and spinach. So I would stick to the most cold tolerant vegetables just
Yeah.
to ensure success. Things that are marginally hardy maybe won't do so well for you. So stick to the ones that really can go the distance in winter.
Well, I've also found like with kale, because I leave my kale out right up until like December.
Yep.
And I found that the kale can handle freezing solid. I mean, so frozen that it's almost brittle, right?
Yes.
So it can
Yeah.
handle freezing overnight. And I find with the kale, as long as the soil doesn't freeze, it can
Yeah.
freeze overnight. It'll freeze overnight, thaw out, and then continue growing a little bit during the day. But
Mhm.
it's when the soil freezes that the kale starts to die, very probably because it can't draw up water from the soil anymore.
Yeah.
So with
And it
the
depends on the
harvest,
variety. Like certain
yes,
kales, like winter boar or red boar or red Russian or winter white, they're more cold tolerant than something like dinosaur or,
uh,
kale,
yeah, the
which is not,
lacinato, yeah,
yeah,
yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
I
Love it.
agree.
I mean, it's gorgeous. It's delicious, but it's
It's
not as cold
delicious.
hardy. So if you
Yes,
want something to really go the distance, then I would definitely pick the winter hardy ones. And you can put a mini hoop tunnel over top of them, a cloche, or even mulch them with straw.
yeah.
And they will definitely keep going all winter long for you, even in an open garden.
Well, and I gotta say, I mean, this is a little off topic, but it's somewhat related. Um, like the difference between so I grow, I think it's called Siberian kale. It's a very wild kale. It gets huge. It's
Right.
like red Russian kale, but the stems are white.
Okay.
Okay.
Yep. There
And
is a
it's
white
my
Russian too, though.
it's one year I got red Russian kale from actually from Halifax as a transplant.
Yep.
I planted those, and some of them survived the winter and went to seed, and I saved the seeds. I've been replanting and saving seeds from that every year, but they never were red again. They've
Amazing.
always been white since then. This just
Hmm.
almost looks like a Swiss chard in a weird way.
Yeah.
Anyway, the funny thing is that all summer long, whenever I harvested these, my wife said they tasted terrible, and my
Yeah.
kids sort of just ate them to be good, to get the dessert, but and they weren't good, right?
No.
And
No.
we just had some yesterday for supper, and they were I had the leftovers for lunch today at work. I was like, oh my God, this kale is amazing. It's amazing
Yeah.
how much better it tastes
We don't
when
eat
you've
it in
had some
summer.
cold. It's not yet. I've
Yeah.
decided this year, I might even write an article about this, that I'm done, because I've done videos on like how to make summer kale taste good, like blanching
Mm.
it and different things like that to get the bitterness out, because
Yeah.
it is almost a waste of time to harvest it in the summer. I mean,
Yeah.
I mean, if it's losing leaves, and the leaves get taken, the lower leaves get attacked by snails and some things like that. So
Cabbage worms.
I feel
Yeah.
like you should be
Yeah.
harvesting it or working with it, but it's practically inedible in the summer by comparison. I mean, it's edible, but the difference between the summer kale and the October, November It is so much better this time of year.
And that's true too of, things like leeks and beets and carrots and parsnips. And it's because, the starches are transformed into sugars by the cold temperatures. It's sort of like a natural antifreeze by the plant. So that's why it tastes so much better now.
Yes, well, and I also think there must be something going on because like they're bitter in the summer, and I think they're producing like a poison to keep
Like
was
higher
oxalic
sulfur
acid.
compounds.
Yeah, no, all these sorts of things, right? To keep the, to decrease pest predation, but
Yep.
they don't need that. I mean, it's not like they're making decisions and but they
On
don't
a
need.
chemical level there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. I mean, so it must just be the case that, I mean, those things are not needed in October. And I mean, slugs aren't coming out at night in October
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
it's too damn cold, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, what a
Thank
difference,
God.
It's so much
I
better.
know.
I've
It's
got
so much
these
better.
I've got these cultivars
Yeah.
of dandelions that I keep in my garden.
Okay. Like, are they cultivated types? Like
Yeah,
French
I can't remember.
dandelions?
Punto, I think it's called.
Okay. Yeah.
They're an Italian dandelion. So, in April they're okay, and then the rest of the summer they taste like poison.
Right.
And then I was out in my garden just this last weekend, and I snapped one off, and you eat dandelions, they don't taste good usually, right?
Yeah.
So I
Very
snapped
bitter.
one off and chewed on. I was like, this doesn't have a bitter taste anymore. So I was going to do a video this weekend on like the difference, right? This is when you want to harvest. Anyway, I was out the other day; they were all gone. A rabbit got into my garden and ate
No.
all of them. I
They
mean, this
know.
is
They
like
know the truth.
these things are like hosta, right? So
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
big
Totally
bouquet,
confident.
and it's gone, except
Oh
for
my
like, so
God.
so there was like the outside leaves and the inside leaves. They left the crappy outside leaves. Ate all the
They'll
nice
probably
inside.
grow back. Cover
So
the mini hoop tunnel. They'll grow back, but still, that's frustrating.
yeah, those rabbits know their stuff. It's like they were
Oh my
waiting.
God.
They're
Yeah,
right
really.
next
They
to
saw
the
you doing it.
yes, exactly. Well, they're right next to the edge of the garden, so the animals do walk, like there's basically a game
Oh
trail
yeah.
all the way around the perimeter of the garden. So things are always walking by.
Yep.
What's in there,
Me too. I
Yeah,
know,
you
it's
do you have a fence around
frustrating.
your garden?
I have an electric fence,
You
yeah.
have an electric fence. You're
And then I
electrified.
have a chicken wire fence around the bottom because the day after I put the electric fence in, I got groundhogs. So the deer stay out now, the rabbits stay out, and the groundhogs stay out, knock on wood.
Well, that's the thing. I have chicken wire around the bottom, but I don't. I think it's not well.
They can tunnel under it. It should be sunk at least like 6 inches down. And mine's not, but it still seems to keep them out.
Yeah,
But it should be buried at least six
there's a
inches or a foot.
there's a flaw in my system somewhere because they seem to get
Yeah.
in and destroy things, not all the time, but periodically, right?
Probably the same
Um,
one. More bunny. It's
exactly.
Bugs Bunny.
Oh
Yeah.
man. Well,
Yeah.
I think we've killed off all our questions. Is there anything else you want to say about greenhouses? Anything we didn't cover that is top of
Gosh.
mind?
I think we covered all the points that I would have wanted to for greenhouses. We talked a lot about the structures and caring for them and the different plants and how you can use them and
Yeah.
picking the right type and where to put it. So yeah, I think we covered a lot of ground.
Okay. Well, maybe you'll inspire me this year like you did last time, and maybe I'm trying to think of where I
Yeah,
want to
let's do
give
it.
up. I have to sacrifice space in the garden to do this.
I know, I did too, but I don't regret it in the least,
You gained.
I did. It's about your goals though. I mean, the amount of tomatoes I can produce now is unbelievable. So,
Yeah, yeah. Well, and I do the one thing I is lacking now is the one thing I haven't gotten a good harvest yet is the eggplant, right? We really like it.
yeah.
Like the whole family loves eggplant.
Yeah.
Especially considering like the grocery store sells one
Oh my
kind,
God. I know. I
when there's
know.
like hundreds of kinds, right?
I usually
Um,
grow about 4 different varieties. Mostly, I had 1 Indian variety this year, 3 Asian varieties, and oh my gosh, like they're so delicious. It's the slender eggplant, so good. And I had
yeah.
6 plants in the greenhouse, and every week I probably picked, I don't know, 12 to 18. So it was
What?
very good. I know. I was so much, but my mother-in-law, my husband's Lebanese, so she makes the most wonderful dishes from it. Oh my gosh, so
Did
good.
you have the eggplant in your greenhouse all summer long?
I did. I mean, I do grow in the garden, but this year I didn't. I just
Oh,
grew in the greenhouse, and the back of the greenhouse, I watered it not as much as I probably should have, but it doesn't care. It's just such a hardy plant. Last year I grew it outside the greenhouse, and it did really well, but it did so much better in the greenhouse.
oh, okay. Well, now you're really
It's a heat-loving plant, and it helps
Yeah,
if you're growing it in a garden bed in our cold climate to pre-warm the soil before you would transplant. It
yeah.
really needs warm roots for the first few weeks for sure.
I know. I think mine, I planted them out, and for the better part of a month, they were just like, "Oh my God, what have you done to
Yeah,
me?" You know.
right? Oh my
So
God.
yeah, and
They
I
don't then they
waited.
don't catch up till September. I know.
Yeah, it really wasn't until yeah. So they really suffered. My peppers and my tomatoes were okay, but the eggplant, man, they suffered. So
Oh, that's too
I
bad.
it would be almost worth building a greenhouse just to get eggplant.
If you
Um,
like them that much, yeah. Although
yeah,
you do
yeah.
say you're pretty foggy, so you gotta consider that as well. I mean, it would still help you, but I don't have a lot of fog where I am,
That's the
so
thing. That's the one of the things that's held me back is that you just don't get as much bang for your buck because you don't have
yeah,
as much sun. But of course, when you do have sun, you're going to get more sun out of your sun.
that's
In a
true.
sense,
That's
right? You're
true.
going to make the most of the sun you have by
Exactly.
having a greenhouse. All right, Nikki, it's great having you on the show. Thanks for coming on and
Thank
talking about
you.
greenhouse and everything else. I hope everything that you're planning for this year is great, and I can't wait to listen to you on CBC and enjoy that.
Thank you so much, Greg. It's been a blast. Thanks again for the invite, and
Great.
it's just great to chat and gardening with you.
Yes, absolutely. All right, everybody.
Awesome.
I hope you found that interesting. If you did, please like, share, subscribe. And until next time, get out there, get at it, have fun in your garden. Nikki, thank you so much for being on the show. Hey, folks, want to help support everything I'm doing here? Check out my sponsors, Vessie's Seeds and Safer's Gardening Products. For Vessie's, go to their website, vessies.com, and use my coupon code GAVS22, and you'll get free shipping as long as there's a pack of seeds in your order and there's no oversized items in your order. Check out the description box of this video for details. For Safer's products and Woodstream products, you can buy all the things I use in my garden, slug, snail killer, BTK, and all. You can buy that from Vessie's, or you can go to their websites for a much wider range of products to solve just about any kind of problem that you can imagine with high quality natural ingredients like oils from seeds and flowers and stuff like that. If you're in Canada, go to woodstreambrands.ca, and as long as your order is over $69, you get free shipping. If you're in the United States of America, then go to saferbrand.com, and as long as your order is over $45 US, you'll get free shipping from them. So yeah, if you want to help support the channel and the podcast, and they sell something you need, buy it from them, and that'll help support everything I'm doing here. Thanks a lot.